Hello everyone. I hope you are well. I am glad that you are in this lesson, and I expect that you have prepared a pen and paper so that you can take notes. I also expect that you have watched the previous lessons we did on YouTube and took detailed notes from them. In previous lessons, we worked globally on complete and incomplete orders, actually in the first lesson. In the second lesson, we talked about the complete order. And in this lesson, we are talking about incomplete order, impulsiveness, or imbalance. What is imbalance? Here is a theory that will be there throughout this video that you can read and write down to learn. I didn't want to write now so as not to waste time, but to start doing quality work right away. Imbalance is an empty space that arises due to strong impulsiveness. An imbalance is essentially a presentation of the previous complete order. Therefore, the incomplete order is mostly a presentation of the previous complete order. And we did that in the previous lesson. If we see a complete order that is constantly consolidating in one area, lasting several days or several hours depending on the time frame, we will see in one moment that the volume that was created here, due to the lack of liquidity, is suddenly formed impulsively in order to transfer all the previous higher liquidity that existed during the sale of the previous complete order. Therefore, in the previous complete orders, there was manipulation of lower levels so that the volume would be collected and so that at one moment the liquidity from the previous higher levels would be transferred. The same applies when it comes to impulsiveness in the form of impulsive selling, only in the opposite situation. Therefore, previously, when there is manipulation of higher levels, we will see a strong impulsiveness that transfers the previous lower liquidity with the fact that more liquidity in the previous full order was constantly transferred, which means that the liquidity lies below the lower levels that were never transferred before. As in this part, where a complete order is formed, which constructs a sustained sale, manipulation of lower downdraft levels, we will see a constant sale and transfer of lower liquidity, which means that the volume of these liquidity, of these contracts that remains here is collected, and that volume strength at the end of the C, that it impulsively acts on the price, which means that there will be a strong imbalance or impulsiveness that will transfer the previous, more liquidity that was never transferred. Because look, every time the lower level is transferred and liquidity is transferred from the lower levels, however, when we look at the higher levels, we never see the transfer of those higher levels. So, at one moment, a volume power impulse must be formed from the previous liquidity that exists here in order to form an impulse and transfer all the previous more liquidity. We will explain in a little more detail how you can distinguish an imbalance from a complete order. So how to distinguish an incomplete order from a complete order. I will explain that later live on the chart, but here we will explain now sketched. The part between the wicks in one candlestick and between the wicks in the previous candlestick, with those wicks not matching, that part will be an imbalance. Look, between this part of the body here and between this wick, there is an empty space where we don't see any wicks that actually hug this candlestick here. We don't see any wick that this candlestick hugs here, but we see an automatic trend forming that leaves again in this here area. Now we will change the color to make it look nicer. So in this part, we see that there is an empty space that it was never transmitted by wick. We see the same in this part here. Look at the difference. This is a complete order, so there is no imbalance here. And look, there is no empty space here that we can mark so that we can understand that there is an incomplete order. And by that, we know that it is an incomplete order. In that sense, it is not, because these wicks on this side of the candlestick do not leave any empty space that can be marked on both sides, both on the left and on the right. The same applies in this case when there is a sale, we see that there is no imbalance here. We see that on both sides, this wick has embraced this candlestick, and in this way, we can understand that there is no imbalance. Look at the places where there is actually an imbalance. It's areas like this part where we see that this body is empty, that there is no wick on the side, no volume power that carries that candlestick. We already see only an empty space, which means that there is an incomplete order. Therefore, when we see the existence of an incomplete command in the parts where there is an incomplete command, there must later be a complete command. We can imagine it as a sale that should now be formed from here. So now all of a sudden a sell-off is starting to form and the price is falling. The Australian dollar is falling. In this case, I imagine wherever there is an imbalance, we have marked with blue color. In those parts, we will see order blocks. Why? Because order blocks are a complete order. In the part where it is full order, it is these wicks. From this here wick to this here wick, it is a complete order, and it is an order block. We will see an imbalance there. Then again, in the part where the order is incomplete, we will see the order blocks. And then again, we will see imbalance or impulsiveness from this area to this area of higher levels, because it is an order block, and an order block completes an incomplete order. Again, in this part where we see an incomplete order, we will again see an order block that needs to be formed again due to the previous imbalance. Let's now look at this sale of some units and mark the imbalance in them. We will do it as follows. From this part that is empty, from the end of this previous shout to the lowest actually levels of this shout is an incomplete order. Above is the complete order until this area here where we see the incomplete order again. Again, the complete order follows above, and again from the beginning of the shout to this part, there is an incomplete order. And now imagine the uptrend that should be formed. After this sale, after this short zone, now we will mark it. Now let's imagine a purchase that starts to form here, and exactly in this area where this small scream is, there will be impulsiveness. And then from the moment where the blue color is found, it means imbalance. We have already explained the part between the screams. We will indicate by placing order blocks with the fact that that part is impulsiveness, and that the incomplete order must be completed with a complete order. Again, this empty part, this part that we didn't mark in blue, is the complete order. We're going to put strong impulsiveness because it has to become impulsive now, because this was an order block in the sense of a complete order, and an incomplete order stands later in the places where there was an order block. So here we mark the impulse. And again, where the blue color is, we will mark the order block. Later, where the empty space is, again the impulse, and again in the part where the previous incomplete order is there, we will mark the complete order or order block, etc. Let's look at this part now. What would a downtrend look like that would form after this purchase? It would become impulsive all the time. Why? Because this whole part here is an order block, because there is no imbalance somewhere. On both sides of these candlesticks, we see that they are covered with wicks, and there is no empty space or impulsiveness. Let's explain further. In the area where sales are located, we will see a strong impulse. Why? In the form of a purchase, because there is a complete order here, and in order to complete this complete order, there must be an incomplete order. What I just explained, we will now apply to the market on the chart, so we will not sketch, but we will work on the prices as the prices really look, but keep in mind that this happens between 80 and 90% of the time in one day, which is a huge period, and that, in fact, it is a large assessment of cases on the basis of which it is possible to follow the order picture or the smaller picture that we will do later. This is not completely sufficient for profitability, but without this one cannot move on. So I expect you to learn this and pay attention to this. We will work on many more details later. This is actually like a faculty you are starting. There is a lot to learn, and in addition to all that technical analysis, it is necessary to gain experience So I expect you to be patient in the whole work. Let's look further. We will study somewhere where we can say this, the market is from Audi, USD, so Australian dollar, American dollar. And to look at the algorithm, let's see what it actually looks like. Let's look at complete and incomplete orders. Pay attention to this uptrend that arises in this part here. See what this uptrend looks like. Do you see an imbalance somewhere? Try to think based on the previous knowledge we had. So based on the previous knowledge I explained. In this uptrend, from this lower level here to this higher level, somewhere we do not see the existence of an imbalance. Why? Because all these candlesticks are embraced with wicks on the left or right. It is enough on the one hand for the whole candlestick to be embraced by wick, so that it can no longer be called an imbalance. Look further. We don't see empty space anywhere. Even this candlestick, we see that there is no empty space anywhere. Until the beginning, this entire candlestick, this body, does not leave empty. Later, this candlestick also has no imbalance anywhere in it. This candlestick has no imbalance anywhere because of this shout. We will see this candlestick. There is no empty space anywhere because of these sides that exist, because of this shout, because we observe empty space in the body, not in the shout. And then when we look further, we see again that this candlestick does not exist. What does that tell us? That tells us the moment when there will be a sale that will reach this uptrend that exists here, and actually the sale that is now from this highest level to this lowest level here. What do we expect? We expect that this uptrend that existed, what is it called? Complete order. We expect it to be completed with an incomplete order. So we expect to see an imbalance now on this right side where sales are made. With the fact that in this part he did not achieve imbalance, now in this part he must become. And let's take a look at what this downtrend looks like. Where do we see the imbalance? We see right in this area here. Therefore, an empty space is left here, which was never broken during this downtrend. Check out this wick and check out this one. So there is an empty space here. Move on. Let's see from this wick, which is barely visible here, this little wick which is barely visible, to this wick here, there is also an empty space. And let's look again to see here as well, there is minimal empty space in this section here. And now let's compare in the later uptrend this incomplete order that we marked. As we learned a little before, an incomplete order completes a complete order. Let's see now. We expect a complete order in the parts where it became an incomplete order in the previous downtrend. There was an imbalance in all these blues, so we expect a complete order in those parts. Let's see now. Wicks are always a complete order. Wick is never an incomplete order. Wicks are always order blocks. And then in this case where there's a blue color, we're going to see wick, which means this leaves what? A complete order is left where it previously became incomplete. Let's look further. In this part where there is an empty space from this blue color to this blue color. So this empty space there. Let's see in this part. We will see that there is what? Complete order. So why the full order? Because we did not mean imbalance. In these blue colors is an incomplete order. In this part, where there is no color, complete order. What does that tell us? This tells us that in the next uptrend that is formed after all this selling, in that part where there is a complete order, we'll see what? Well, an incomplete order. And look at the empty space. A blank space is left from this part here to this part here. Imbalance. Why? Because here it has become a complete order. Let's look further. We can set an example anywhere. Let's say in this case here, we will mark the sale that is formed here impulsively. Look at this imbalance. So here we see that there is an impulsive sale, and we will see that an imbalance is left here. In this imbalance, we see a complete order later in this uptrend. So we don't see empty space anywhere. A candlestick that creates an empty space so that there is no candlestick or only one on the left and right sides. We do not see that anywhere here, which tells us that this is a complete order. This part is not complete, and they complement each other in the right way. Let's look further. Again, in this part, we see an empty candlestick where there is nothing on the left or right side of the downtrend, and then we see later that there is something. In this part of the uptrend, complete order. There is also an empty space here that we see. In the part where there is an empty space, but it is immediately formulated in the form of a sale, so that there is a complete order here. This lower level is not transferred, which means that nothing has been broken and that an uptrend is formed here later, which later emerges again. Now let's look at any example. So we'll mark this imbalance here now that we see, and let's see in some part later wherever that downtrend originated. Look, this is exactly where the previous incomplete order is filled. It's like when you paint a wall and you constantly return to the same place to strengthen the color in that place where, for example, it was weaker. So when we look again in this case, we will see that the later complete order completes the incomplete one, a candlestick that leaves a complete order on the left and right. Here, in this lesson, I want to explain specifically what imbalance is, and in the next lesson, we will do a set of complete and incomplete orders and how we trade, what strategies we approach, and the best way to trade for long-term profitability. I look forward to seeing you in the next YouTube lesson. I wish you all the best. Greeting.